Entertainment headlines this week, from the Kelly Clarkson show ending to Sherry Shepherd's show being canceled.
She says it's for personal reasons. She needs to focus on her kids. She's been saying this for about 2 years now.
Everything looked.
There is a number that changes everything about this story. It is not the price of the car, though that alone would stop most people cold. It is not the cost of the engine or the labor or even the insurance quote that made headlines. The number that changes everything is £5. £5. That is what Mat Armstrong paid to fix a problem that every official source in the automotive world had priced at £300,000. Not 300, not 3,000, 300,000. And he fixed it with a fuse from a British auto parts shop that most people use to buy windscreen wipers. That gap between what the experts quoted and what the actual solution cost is at the heart of one of the most extraordinary stories to emerge from the automotive world in years. But to understand why that number matters, and why the people who run one of the most prestigious car brands on earth were left furious, you need to go back to the beginning. Mat Armstrong has built an entire career on doing things that the automotive establishment insists cannot be done. He rebuilt a Porsche 918. He is currently deep into what may be the most ambitious private rebuild in YouTube history. A crashed Bugatti Chiron Pur Sport that Bugatti CEO Mate Rimac publicly said could not be done outside a factory. His channel is built on a very simple but very powerful premise. If a car can be understood, it can be fixed. And over the years, that philosophy has attracted millions of viewers who watch every diagnosis, every complication, every setback, and every moment of triumph in real time. Armstrong does not just fix cars. He documents the process in a way that exposes how the official repair industry works, what things actually cost, and what separates a genuine mechanical failure from a problem that only becomes expensive when the wrong people are involved. Substack. His acquisition of the Bugatti Veyron was not planned. Armstrong was in Florida working on his Chiron project when the opportunity appeared. He bought the car from a repossession company for what he described as a significantly lower price than market value. In the world of Veyrons, that phrase covers a wide range of territory, but the car came with a known problem that had been quoted at somewhere between £300,000 and £350,000 to repair. That quote was the reason the car had ended up with a repossession company in the first place. Whoever had owned it before had either walked away from that number or had simply surrendered the vehicle rather than face a bill that, for most people, would represent the entire value of a house. Only 450 Bugatti Veyrons were ever produced, and current values exceed £1.5 million. The economics of owning one, let alone repairing one, exist in a category most people will never encounter. Understeer plus 2. What made the acquisition unusual was the condition of the rest of the vehicle. The exterior was in mint condition, the interior was as good as new, and the engine started. The main problem was the gearbox, which would not engage any gears. From the outside, the car looked perfect. From behind the wheel, it was completely undrivable. Armstrong found a range of failures that he described, in his own words, as running from nuisance to catastrophic. Multiple cylinders were misfiring. Pink coolant was leaking from the front radiator. And the gearbox, the component carrying the largest and most frightening repair estimate, refused to function at all. That collection of faults, added together, painted a picture that would have sent most people straight to a specialist with their credit card already extended. Supercar Blondie. Armstrong did not reach for his credit card. He reached for his diagnostic equipment. The Veyron's gearbox is a 7-speed dual-clutch unit developed specifically for the car, and a genuine failure would indeed cost a ruinous amount to address. When Bugatti quotes £300,000 for a replacement gearbox, that figure is not invented. The unit is extraordinarily complex, engineered to handle more than 1,000 horsepower from the Veyron's famous W16 engine, and sourcing, fitting, and calibrating a replacement requires specialist knowledge, factory-level tooling, and parts that exist in very limited supply. In theory, the quote was reasonable for what was assumed to be wrong. The problem was that nobody had actually confirmed what was wrong before generating that number. The official diagnosis appeared to stop at the symptoms. Armstrong went deeper. Substack. What he found was that the car initially would not shift into gear due to a single melted fuse for the hydraulic gearbox pump. Not a shattered gearbox. Not a destroyed dual-clutch mechanism. Not a catastrophic failure requiring a factory-level rebuild. A blown fuse. Armstrong drove to Halfords, the British auto parts retailer, and bought a fuse. The gearbox faults cleared. The car worked. The repair bill went from £350,000 to approximately £2. He later described the moment in a way that required no dramatic embellishment. The quote was £300,000 for a new gearbox, and he had just fixed it with something from Halfords. For context, Halfords is the kind of shop where people stop on a Saturday morning to pick up motor oil and replacement bulbs. It is not where you expect the solution to a six-figure hypercar crisis to be waiting on a shelf. Review Substack. The moment Armstrong posted that result, the internet reacted accordingly. The story of a Bugatti Veyron gearbox failure being reduced to a simple £5 fix spread rapidly across automotive communities, social media platforms, and news outlets. The gap between the official quote and the actual solution was so extreme that many people struggled to accept it at first. Surely something had been missed. Surely the real problem still existed underneath the surface. Surely a £300,000 estimate could not dissolve because of a part available at a high street retailer. Those doubts were understandable, but they were also, at least in that initial moment, incorrect. YouTube. Armstrong himself acknowledged that a blown fuse is never the end of the story. He noted that fuses do not simply fail on their own. There has to be a problem further down the line. And there was. Upon closer inspection of the gearbox pump, the team discovered charred, brittle wiring. The heat generated by the pump had effectively damaged the plastic casing. The pump, which is shared with the roof mechanism of an Audi A5, appears to be pushed to its absolute limits in the Veyron application. It activates every time a door opens to prime the system and maintains 55 bar of pressure. The fuse had not failed randomly. It had failed because the underlying pump was working harder than it was designed to, and the wiring surrounding it had degraded over time under that sustained stress. The £5 fix had made the car drivable. What it had also done was reveal exactly where the next problem was located, which is a very different outcome from the factory solution that would have replaced everything without necessarily explaining anything. Supercar Blondie Review. Despite the dashboard lighting up like a Christmas tree with transmission and engine warnings, the Veyron's first drive proved the car's fundamental bones were strong. The sheer torque of the W16 remained unparalleled, providing a linear surge of power that survived even a decade of neglect. However, the drive also revealed the limits of the initial fix. The gearbox pump began to stay active indefinitely after the drive, suggesting that while the fuse solved the symptom, a pressure sensor or sticky relay remained the true enemy. Armstrong was not declaring victory. He was doing what he always does, using each solution as a tool to identify the next problem, working through a machine layer by layer rather than replacing everything at once and hoping the bill covers all possibilities. Review. The reaction from Bugatti's corner was shaped by a much older and more complicated story. By the time the Veyron footage was generating attention, Armstrong was already deep in a very public conflict with the manufacturer over his Chiron Pur Sport rebuild. Mat Armstrong first heard about the crashed $6 million Bugatti Chiron Pur Sport in October 2025. Owned by content creator Alex Gonzalez from Miami, the hypercar had suffered a massive accident, with insurance quotes ballooning to $1.7 million. The front end was crumpled, the airbags had deployed, and a huge array of parts needed replacing. When Gonzalez decided to pursue an independent rebuild rather than accept Bugatti's official repair quote, Armstrong was brought in to lead the project. Supercar Blondie. What followed became one of the most discussed automotive stories in recent memory. Bugatti locked the vehicle identification number, ensuring no dealership could supply parts to support the rebuild. The car had effectively been blacklisted by its own manufacturer. Mate Rimac, the Bugatti CEO, posted a response on Instagram in which he addressed the situation directly. He stated that the intricate parts of a Bugatti could not be three-dimensionally printed at home, and that repair costs referenced in certain videos were not accurate and had been inflated. His position was clear. Bugatti was not going to endorse or assist an independent rebuild of one of its most complex machines. Supercar Blondie. Rimac was careful to emphasize that he held Armstrong in high regard and enjoyed his videos. He even said he would be glad to support the project as a fellow car enthusiast. But he also drew a clear line. According to Rimac, the damage to the Chiron Pur Sport was not merely cosmetic. The accident had destroyed the transmission housing and caused structural damage to the monocoque. A repair that did not meet factory standards, he argued, posed a serious risk to both current and future owners. The CEO described the Chiron as a very valuable asset requiring exceptional care due to its engineering complexity, and said Bugatti wanted its cars to remain on the roads for 50 or even 100 years. The offer remained open for the car to be taken to the Molsheim facility in France for a proper factory repair. Carscoopstopker. Armstrong declined. He made clear that it was Alex Gonzalez's choice to pursue a private rebuild rather than send the car to Bugatti. With official parts out of the equation, the team decided to either fabricate components or source them through other means. When they needed airbags, they sourced them from an Audi A3. A multi-million-dollar Bugatti Chiron Pur Sport was being fitted with components from one of the most common family hatchbacks in Europe. The contrast between the car's status and the solutions being applied to it made the story impossible to ignore. Automotive journalists who rarely engaged with YouTube content began publishing detailed coverage. The pressure on Bugatti mounted with every new episode. Supercar Blondie family stories. Armstrong later opened up about what had happened behind the scenes, explaining that his relationship with Rimac existed on a personal level. They shared mutual friends, both loved supercars and hypercars, and there was genuine mutual respect. But when the corporate machinery became involved, the dynamic shifted. Armstrong's videos were reaching millions of people. Rimac posted a response, and the internet amplified the friction far beyond what either of them had intended. What began as a rebuild project had become a test case for a much larger question. Who has the right to repair a privately owned vehicle, and what happens when the manufacturer believes that repair carries genuine safety implications? Supercar Blondie. Eventually, Bugatti lifted the parts blacklist on the Chiron Pur Sport and reduced their repair estimates. The car had started again, and the rebuild was edging closer to completion. It was a significant development that suggested the public scrutiny had produced results. Whether the manufacturer's softening position reflected a genuine reconsideration or simply an acknowledgement that the controversy was creating more reputational damage than the rebuild itself is a question that remains open. What is clear is that the project moved forward, and the car that had been declared irreparable outside a factory was being rebuilt in exactly that setting. Luxury launches. Against that backdrop, the Veyron fuse story carried a particular weight. The Veyron continued fighting back even after the initial fix. A blown fuse knocked out the indicators, a stubborn engine misfire kept triggering warning lights, and a TPMS fault threatened to stop speed mode from activating altogether. The Veyron began shutting down unexpectedly and refused to run properly, leaving Armstrong and his team scrambling for answers. Diagnostic checks suggested a potential communication issue involving the fuel pump. Control module, but the exact cause remained unclear. Every fix revealed a new layer. Every solution exposed a new problem. That is the nature of working on a machine this complex without the resources of the original manufacturer behind you. Supercar Blondie. But the core story remained intact. Armstrong now owned two Bugattis simultaneously. The Veyron that had been fixed with a fuse, and the Chiron Pur Sport rebuild that had involved splitting the car in half, arguing with the manufacturer, sourcing parts that Bugatti refused to supply, and welding components that had been specifically engineered to break in a crash. The contrast between those two projects was remarkable. One represented the best-case scenario of independent diagnosis, a massive quoted repair reduced to pocket change through patient investigation. The other represented the most difficult possible challenge, a car so complex and so thoroughly damaged that even the company that built it recommended against an independent rebuild. Substack. What connects them is a single principle that Armstrong has applied throughout his career. Official quotes are not diagnoses. They are estimates based on assumptions, and assumptions can be wrong. In the case of the Veyron, the assumption was that a gearbox showing catastrophic fault codes must have a catastrophically damaged gearbox. The assumption was wrong. A no-gear issue that had generated a six-figure quote was fixed with a new fuse, while the remaining issues including misfires, a leaky radiator, and further electrical faults continued to be investigated. The quote existed because nobody had done the diagnostic work to separate the real failure from the symptom that was triggering it. Armstrong did that work, and the result was a gap between cost and reality so extreme it became a news story in its own right. Supercar Blondie. For Bugatti, that gap is uncomfortable regardless of the circumstances. A quote of £300,000 for a gearbox that turns out to need a fuse is not a story any luxury manufacturer wants attached to its name. The brand depends on the perception that its vehicles occupy a category beyond ordinary mechanical reasoning, that the engineering is so extraordinary that only the original manufacturer can truly understand it. One observer close to the situation summed up the dynamic directly. Bugatti has to be the most expensive car. It has to go to the wealthiest customers. They do not want someone exposing them and taking them on head-to-head. That comment captured something true about the tension underneath this entire story. Armstrong was not setting out to embarrass anyone. He was doing his job. But the results of that job, documented in front of millions of viewers, kept producing findings that were difficult for the manufacturer to absorb quietly. Supercar Blondie. At a Broad Arrow auction in Las Vegas in October 2025, a 2010 Bugatti Veyron sold for over $2 million, reinforcing the continued market demand for these machines. These are not forgotten relics. They are appreciating assets, increasingly treated as investment-grade collectibles. That status makes the question of independent repair even more significant. If a car is worth £2 million on the open market, but requires a £300,000 gearbox to remain drivable, the economics of ownership become brutally punishing. Armstrong's work on the Veyron demonstrated that the true cost of keeping one of these machines running may be meaningfully different from what official channels suggest, provided someone is willing to do the diagnostic work rather than accept the first number they are given. UCLA. The story of Mat Armstrong and Bugatti is still being written. The Veyron project is ongoing. The Chiron rebuild continues. And with every video, the audience that watches Armstrong work through these problems gets a view of the automotive world that the industry does not typically provide. Not the finished product on a showroom floor, but the mechanical reality underneath it, with all of its complications, contradictions, and occasional moments where a 5-pound fuse does what no £300,000 quote ever managed to do. That view is what drives the attention, the controversy, and ultimately,